Hey guys, and I'm Richard Kerr. I am a clinical mental health counselor and master's level intern, currently working at the Center for Personal Development here at Methodist University. Um, Obviously, some things have changed since last week or the week before. We're going to have to do some of the stuff online, and that's okay. We're going to adapt to that, for which I decided to do this little narration and kind of put it in a video format so you guys can digest it on your own time at home. I hope this kind of helps you out a little bit. Thank you also to Miss Laura Lamb for giving me the opportunity to present to the students. If you guys have any questions at the end of the presentation, I'm going to put my email address and information so you guys can contact me with any questions or concerns. Also, the information for the Center for Personal Development. We're always there for you guys if you need us. All right, so I wanted to start here with a couple of quotes. The first one's by Soren Kierkegaard. Um, some people may talk about him as the father of existentialism. He said, "Anxiety is the dizziness of freedom." And the second quote I really like, which is also relevant, is, "The price that humans pay for autonoetic consciousness um, is anxiety." I don't know why the whole thing didn't push through, but um, Joseph Ledoux is, in my view, uh, kind of the modern view of philosophy from the cognitive perspective that Kierkegaard started. So it's kind of coming full circle there. Um, so I want to talk to you guys a little bit about anxiety, and a lot of the time when I get clients coming into the office and they use the word anxiety, they kind of have their own definitions of what that is. Um, Anxiety can be, I guess, loosely defined into a cluster of symptoms that relate to fear or a fear reaction. And why do we have fear? Well, fear really comes from back in the day, evolutionarily speaking, when we were um, living in our early hominid years, about say about 120,000 to about 40,000 years ago. Um, we kind of developed our brains to react evolutionarily to inputs of danger. So here in the funny little picture, there's a part of the little caveman in here that's reacting or understanding signals that indicate danger, and so he's taking a choice to hightail it out of there. Um, the main function of fear and anxiety is to act as a signal of danger, threat, or motivational conflict, and it also helps you save yourself. Essentially, it's a survival instinct. Um, I'm not going to go too much into a lecture about the human brain and how this works, but I wanted to kind of overview real quick. I guess you guys can read that on your own, but essentially, the signals of fear go from the outside in, and so seeing a face that relates, like for example, seeing fangs or it going to night, or being colder than usual, or a special smell like the smell of burned wood, would be primary signals that get interpreted primarily at first by the cerebral cortex. And so there's two functions that occur when the brain is perceiving fear. The first signal is sent through the cerebral cortex and is processing the danger. And as you can see in the picture, the cerebral cortex is essentially that upper layer tissue that's on your brain. Um, but at the same time, um, the signal is being sent through your thalamus into the older part of your brain, which is the amygdala, right? So the first part of the brain is kind of processing at a slower pace than the more ancient side of your brain. And you can see here the amygdala has received that signal already by the time that stimulus is processed completely. The brain makes a decision of whether to create a reaction that's going to lead to fear and anxiety, and that's what we call in the fawn effect, or fight or flight. Or you're going to decide, okay, it's just something that looks scary, but it's not, and I don't need to react to it. So normally the brain would work those two processes. The amygdala is way faster, and so sometimes you kind of get that immediate reaction, like freezing in the moment or reacting before you even think about it. And then there's that part of your brain that catches up, which is the more complex process, especially in that front part of the brain called the prefrontal cortex, where we kind of process some of the more complicated aspects, and it helps us offset some of that initial fear response. And so, of course, nowadays we don't react immediately to fear in the same way that we needed to back in the day, because our dangers are different. So generally, people that live in a large city or in an urban environment in general, we don't really have to worry too much about being eaten by bears or tigers. Um, but we do have general anxieties, like there's too much traffic, I'm not going to make that deadline, I'm going to get an F in the class, whatever the stimulus is. And that's most recent one is the little picture I put in there is the coronavirus right now is causing a great deal of anxiety to a number of us. Obviously, if we compare that with being eaten by a tiger, it seems like trivial, but in reality, it's not the stimulus itself that's creating the fear response. It's our perception of that fear. It's that perception that's creating the anxiety. And to come full circle into the original explanation, I just wanted to tell you guys that essentially it is also your brain adapting to the new stimulus, but still reacting in the original biological intended way. Um, so while we do need that reaction in order to survive, right, that fear response, um, the endless stimulus and overstimulus of our modern society, what it does, it has created this kind of uh, uh, brain reaction that's creating adrenal fatigue. It's just the tiredness of having to react again and again and again and again and again continuously, right? That's when you feel exhausted. That's when people start seeing changes in their body. We're going to talk a little bit about that. So the CBT model, the cognitive behavioral therapy model, is one that relates to what we originally called the Beck triad, or the relationship between thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. And you see that in here, it's not so much a triangle as much as it is kind of a circle, but it's a graph that is showing essentially how those three relate. Um, a situation or a particular behavior or stimulus can elicit a a thought pattern, and that thought pattern can create a, a cognitive process that leads to a particular feeling. So let's just say, for example, I didn't study too much for this exam, and I got an F, and the thought immediately was, oh, I'm just dumb. I start calling myself names, and that feeling hurts me, so I feel sadness. And because I feel sadness and because I'm putting myself down, I don't study. And because I don't study, I fail. And so it just becomes this kind of vicious circle of anxiety, right? And it just starts building itself up. And it's that self-fulfilling prophecy, right? That every single time something corroborates, right? Like, I'm gonna fail the next exam or whatever. And so you just keep doing it and doing it and just keep failing it. It just becomes this kind of like cyclical situation. But in this particular pattern, I want to, in when it pertains in the CBT model to anxiety, those thought patterns deal also with the moods, the physical functioning of your body, and the behaviors. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that too. Thoughts in general is just the 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 abstract um, um, creation that we have in our mind. So in the case of anxiety, we're going to go with, oh my God, what's going on? I'm going to fail the test. Uh, are those people talking about me? One of the common complaints I get is, yeah, I was walking down into the calf, and then I saw some people that were talking and laughing, and they automatically believed that they were talking about me. Um, and I don't know, but I felt like they were talking about me, right? Um, that leads to other thoughts that are more complex. So, for example, when you're having a panic attack, you can have the feeling that, oh my God, am I having a heart attack? Am I having a stroke? And those feelings are feeding into the fear, and so it gets worse and worse and worse. Of course, unless you have a genuine heart condition, you're not dying. You're simply experiencing chest pain, muscular contractions that are like similar, like, and you just don't know what you're experiencing. So, of course, you're panicking because of it. Uh, a lot of people have a generalized fear of death or a preoccupation with death. Talk about that in here in a little bit too. Moods is just general nervousness, and then what we like to call actual anxiety. And then when we get into the actual panic attacks, and that's when a person is having those physical manifestations that I was talking about earlier. Um, and then here's in not so not you don't have to read the whole thing, but essentially this is some of the physical manifestations. You may recognize them if you ever had to deal with anxiety, having a rapid heartbeat, having a dry mouth, having a hard time expressing your thoughts. That's really interesting one because there's a part of your brain called Broca's area, and when you're under high levels of stress, it's been studied in people suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder and conditions of stress, that part of their brain is not functioning very well. So there, you might have noticed that there's a time when you're going through a lot of stress, and you're kind of having kind of a mini panic attack, and people are talking to you and you think you're replying but you're actually not, or you're trying to say something and you can't think of the words, and in turn it kind of feeds into more anxiety. And that's actually a physical manifestation of that particular physiology. Also, having tension headaches or regular headaches, fatigue, shortness of breath, muscle tension in certain legs, or looseness, also shaking or trembling that you can explain because it's not temperature related. Uh, and that kind of leads into what they call the fight or flight response, which we talked about earlier, and that is essentially a panic. So, for example, with people that suffer from anxiety or for post-traumatic stress disorder, usually, if say you went through a fire when you were a child, and now somebody's like having a barbecue next door, and you smell the smoke and you don't recognize it, your body starts reacting before you can even tell yourself, wait, that's a barbecue, don't worry about it. It also can happen with people with anxiety, where they say that just the mention of having a test or somebody talking about a test annoys you or makes you angry and you don't understand why. Um, that could be leading on to the fact that you're kind of dealing with concurrent anxiety because of a cognition that is reminding you of the stress. Um, and then, of course, I mentioned earlier, adrenal fatigue is just the constant physiological reaction that you have to go on again and again and again. And because your body hormone levels are so high at all times, you start seeing those physical manifestations. And again, it's all cyclical. When it comes to behaviors, some of the behaviors that come as a sequel of having this kind of physical and emotional and mood reactions is going to be avoidance. Uh, some people seek to isolate, the feelings of helplessness. There's a phenomenon that's being widely studied called learned helplessness. Feel free to Google it. Essentially, it is the feeling that you can uh, come out of the situation that you're in, and you start kind of justifying things after a while. Like you just kind of tell yourself, it's no point in trying. Feeling panic or fear or uneasiness, kind of like the sense of dread that something's going to happen. You can't quite put your finger on it. Having mood swings, feeling worthless, hopelessness, and despair, feeling like you're in danger, not quite being able to express to somebody that would ask you why you feel in danger. You're just kind of paranoid a little bit. And then you have also obvious flashbacks if that's part of like your experience, something that you experienced in the past, and this reminded you of that, or feelings of dissociation, and that's like when you almost feel like you're outside of your body. Like I could see myself sitting in there, like in this picture, this person sitting in there, and it's almost like if I can see myself from the outside in. Um, and I wanted to kind of introduce the concept and how we work on it from these two quotes. One of them is by Seneca, which was a Stoic. And Stoicism is very much the kind of the birth of the mindset that where cognitive behavioral therapy kind of stems from. Um, and that is when this particular case it says, true happiness is to enjoy the present without anxious dependence on the future, right? It's just to be able to be present in the moment that you're in without creating anxiety about what's going to happen that we may or may not be able to control. And then this one is obviously my favorite author. And I strongly recommend that you look up this book. It's called Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. You have the power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength, right? Okay. And then I'm going to teach you a quick skill set here. And this one pertains to processing the anxiety and the stress patterns. This is something that I use very often with my clients. The first one is identifying what they call a trauma list or a trauma log. And it's just essentially identify the situations and the thought patterns that occur on a regular basis, right? So I would ask you, it's like, well, tell me, when do you feel this kind of anxiety? When did it happen last time? That kind of conversation. And you'd say, well, I was sitting at a restaurant with my friends, and then I heard a loud noise outside, and I just kind of started feeling hot, and my face felt hot, and like my ears felt hot, or I overreacted and I screamed, and everybody looked at me like I'm a weirdo, and so that made me feel bad about myself, and I was just depressed the rest of the afternoon, something to that effect, right? And so what we do after that is that we identify kind of a number of those things, and I tend to identify what the patterns are, and and I get all the W's essentially, who, what, where, when, right? Um, and we process it through something called the ABCDE worksheet, and we can go further into detail after that if you ask me. But essentially, you trying to figure out what the antecedent situation was, what happened before this reaction occurred, then the behavior, what happened in that moment, what was the consequent, right? And then you essentially what you do is you say, this is what happened, this is what I did, and this is how I felt. This was the thought process, right? So let's just say, like in the example I put in earlier, right? You say, oh well, it's like I did this test and I didn't do very well, and I felt dumb because like all my peers did really well on that exam, and I'm just a dumb person. That's it. And so you identify that the narrative is I feel dumb or I am dumb. Sometimes people use the am to like really label themselves. And so you're gonna say, okay, let's challenge that, right? And that's that third part, challenge thoughts. And I have a little exercise that I call the thoughts on trial. And what I want you to do is I want you to be the judge, I want you to be the district attorney, and I want you to be the defense attorney. And I want you to argue both sides of the case. And most of the time, when you examine the evidence, what you discovered is that that thought pattern is probably what we call maladaptive, and that pattern grows from having uh, believed these things without really thinking about objectively what they were being created. And so a lot of the times you kind of the client will be like, oh yeah, I realized that this was not that thought of for. So now it's not magical. It takes some time, but over time, what that person starts doing is you start creating this sense of, let me look empirically how I can overcome this anxiety. What is creating it? Why am I making these beliefs about myself, right? And then at the end, I like to kind of create this kind of like, okay, this is an exercise I also do. It's called the can control, can control. what are my possible courses of action, right? And you start very easy. What are the things that I can control about the situation, and what are the things that I can't control about that situation? So if we go back to Marcus Aurelius, he was saying those things that you can't control, just accept them, and in virtue of accepting them, you find power, because then you start focusing your energy in the things that you can in fact control, right? So like with the coronavirus, is about like, what can I do? Well, I can keep some social distancing. I can wash my hands. I can try to keep my mind active. I can try to do all these things. I can buy that book that Rick recommended, Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, and maybe I'll just read it instead of watching so much Netflix, whatever. Uh, and that kind of build yourself up, and do the things that you can in fact do, and not worry about so much the things that you can't control. Now, I understand that when I say don't worry so much, it sounds like I'm actually asking you for a hard ask. But in reality, what happens is that when you put so much energy outside, uh, into helping the things that you can, then your brain has less energy to work on the things that you can't control. Um, and again, going about full circle on this little lecture, the whole point of it is that um, um, there's certain things that we can in fact uh, control, and we should in fact try, but accept that we have a lot of things that we don't. And so by understanding and by accepting our circumstances, right? It's not the same as quitting. It's not the same as giving up. It's not the same as relinquishing power. It's more of a being able to philosophically understand that I can do a lot more with my brain, and that I can spend that energy in a more productive way, right? And finally, and this is something that I always tell people, is like, seek friendships and connections. Uh, have a good support system, whether it be mom and dad, whether it be siblings, whether it be friends, cousins, whatever, your circle of friends in college, whether it be a strong social works group, whether it be, um, I mean, you think of it, there's a number of um, groups right now that meet on the regular basis based on interest, clubs, associations. As long as you have somebody that you can rely on, you will be have a lot better chances of overcome this successfully. Generally, no man is an island, as they say. Okay, and like I said at the end, I was going to give you my information. My email is that rkerr@methodist.edu. And again, I'm currently interning for the Center of Personal Development. That number that's at the bottom is the number for this Center for Personal Development. We are usually there 9 to 5. On the coming weeks, what we're going to do is we're shifting into an online counseling system. It is secured. It does meet the requirements for secure communications stipulated for our profession. So you can confidently send us an email if you want to talk about anything, you want to process some things, whatever. We're always there to see you guys, and to help you work through whatever goals that you may have set for yourself. And I hope you guys stay safe and healthy. And if you have any questions, like I said, I'm always here for you. Bye bye.